So that's kind of, that's the legal language, I think, that Barnes and Thornburg, wanted us to make sure we understood, at least the EDC standpoint, before we began on this endeavor, that is going to be the legal anchor that ties the boat down, is that these residential development areas directly contribute to this TIF, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's, and I'm saying infrastructure as in like the highway systems and how they tie in, directly tied to the labor force that's leaving the community, and directly tied to the Packers and the amount of workers that they have coming in. So, yes, I think that if you're not set up like Carroll County, it's gonna be a lot harder to do what we're about to do, if you guys proceed, because of the fact that not every community commutes 40%. And so, how can you justify spending these dollars there if you can't? And they firmly, Barnes and Thornburg, firmly believe that they can. So, yeah, that's a great question. You know, that was.
And wasn't there a number there where if an employee lives in Carroll County, works at IPC, what their longevity there is versus someone who commutes every day?
Yeah,
some number.
Yeah, 3 times. It was 3 times.
3 times.
Yeah, 3 times. Yeah, so 3 times. If they live in Carroll County, they're 3 times more likely to be employed there a year later than what they currently have out of county. And that's a quantifiable dollar. Like, as business, as big as they are, $1 billion company, they can give us that number to say we are saving X, and so they are going to help us. I didn't go into detail at that meeting, but we are going to be working through their VP of Human Resources on how we can capture need, and some of that need could be, and I'm just penciling back of the envelope here, like one of them could be surveying anybody that makes over 65,000 or grosses 70,000 a year, surveying all those folks to see who, not even survey, but just do an analysis of those folks to see which ones live out of the county, and then actually going to them and asking them if there was a home available in Carroll County, would you buy it? We can get that granular on those details, and Mark thinks that it could be in the hundreds of folks that are grossing over 70 a year, can afford a new home construction, or at least a dual income, live out of the county and would purchase a home here if it was available now. And that in itself is power that we can take to developers and say, I have a residential TIF area that's been identified, there's resources, we're friendly to develop residential development in that area, and I have a need that wants to buy homes right here, right now. And then there's more to that relationship that we could ever have. So, I mean, that's, because you guys are making investments in 421 and widening the road, and there's a lot of things that Indiana Packers that we've been able to service that area, creates that relationship with the EDC to be able to have those conversations. And if not, then we wouldn't be able to. So.
The way I understood it the other night is it starts at the RDC and it ends with the RDC. Is that kind of correct on with that?
Yes, sir. And there's a good chance that it's not going to look like geographically what we start with. And even and I would be afraid to even throw you guys a map on, like, here's what it would look like. Because I want people to have input before we even draw lines. We're going to have to, unfortunately. That's the way it is. But if we meet with the schools, we meet with the Mayor Worling and Delphi and Flora, and we just say, hey, here's the area of growth, and then we get the financial analysis. So yes, we would. It may change by a parcel here or there, but.
My next question is, are you looking at certain size parcels to cover what? 8 homes, 10 homes, 5 homes, 3 homes? What? These are certain size parcels you're looking at, Jay, on these residential tips?
No, and I think we need to be understanding. Like, if we could be talking about, I don't even want to give a number. I gotta sit down with the community, and they pay us to do this stuff, and so we need to sit down with them and say, I see this many acres south of town potentially in the next 15 years. That's where your growth area is, and so it won't be. We don't want to necessarily be what an AB area plan where they call it spot zoning. They don't like doing spot zoning, so I don't want to get in the business of picking winners and losers for development areas. But if there is an area that you could potentially get a group of homes in, and it's feasible, then I think it's worthwhile. So I mean, I know where there's 120 acres right now that is near town, that the property owner is willing to develop residential homes on that lot, and it's probably, I don't know, it's probably 2 parcels away from a residential development that's for sale right now. So why wouldn't I just take that whole area and designate it a residential tip area, even though I'm probably only capturing a development of maybe 12 to 15 homes, but I've got all this other land that's been identified as potential growth. And then that kind of just allows us to establish that area. So those are scenarios that I think we won't know until we're talking to those communities. I mean, 50 acres became available south of Flora just the other night, so now I've got to look at it from a whole different perspective to say, oh wow, if he's gonna develop that, then maybe this tip area goes further than we even thought. And then if we don't, like I said, if you're not allocating, you're not taking the funds from that area, then it's all going back to its local, the school. I mean, we're not, there's no taking, it's just whether we're collecting the growth or we're giving it back to them, so.
Okay, so my next question is, what do you want from the RDC?
I'm seeking approval today to begin the administrative steps to establish a residential tip, so that I would have to engage within the $30,000 budget that you guys created, begin to engage Barnes and Thornburg on getting all the resolutions put together and establishing a clear pathway to getting it done. And that allows me to, because I will be spending money doing that towards the budget. And then I would imagine that the next steps in that would be bringing all those professionals back with me to outline to you guys the clear steps and paths that we're going to take. So they'll be developing the case as well, because I've got to develop the resolutions, we've got to get everything identified, property-wise. So yeah, we'll have another, you'll have to pass, I believe, the original resolution to begin it.
Right.
So today you're not doing that, but it allows me to engage the professional services to get started, so.
Barry, is it, is it appropriate for us to make a motion to have Jake work on behalf of the EDC to engage these folks, or do we have to be the signatories on the contract?
No, he can be your agent and can proceed as your agent. What I was thinking of, here we got another $30,000 that's not on the budget. Where are you gonna, what line item are you gonna spend this out of, you know?
Gonna take up from Brian.
Hmm?
Gonna take up from Brian.
Gonna take it from Brian's share, HWC's contract? I can do that.
He'll want to cut.
I'm asking for no conditions currently.
Do we, do we have a professional services line in the budget?
I'm not-
We,
No, but I'm thinking
They're
of making it
specific.
200,000, right? You don't have anything?
we got Baker Tilly, Barry, and the debt service and
Yeah.
the bond insurance payments, and the project on 421.
So the first thing you gotta remember is, you don't have money in the budget.
So you amended the budget at the same meeting, you approved the budget?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you already approved the budget, so now you have to do an additional or a transfer. So,
Yeah, can't we just do a transfer?
we can,
Instead of changing the budget, just do a transfer,
yeah,
professional fees.
yeah. So the first thing, like, if we're funding this, we would just say we need to transfer 30,000 to a line called professional services,
Correct.
and that can establish that line.
Correct.
And then we take a second motion to approve Jake to work on our behalf with that budget.
Correct.
So,
$30,000 is part of the thing alone. Have you included surveyors? Have you included, title work? Identifying those areas, those parcels that are included in all of those things that come to mind, should we increase this, personal services budget to 50,000?
The consensus I got, and this is verbally, from Rick Hall, Barnes Robert, will be the principal on this project with us, and Matt Eckerly, who will be the principal of Baker Tilly. They both indicated, we were all three on the same call, that $30,000 across the line for establishing residential TIF. Now, we've all heard from professionals before, right? So, that's where they lie. But yeah, the scope could change. I mean, maybe the scope that we were discussing at that time was $30,000. But
Were they under the impression that it might be, multiple locations, the only reason I asked that is because I think we did, when it was 25, I think the last time we did it, in my mind. But, if they're looking at a place in Florida and Delphi,
yeah, because they're gonna have to.
does it keep going up because we got more parcels in different locations? I don't know.
Because we're gonna have to build a financial model based off of assumptions, which is what financial planners, what they do in the case of residential TIF. So if we do, every time we do an area, they're gonna have to run their financial analysis on the assumption of how many homes at what value, because we need those projections for this commission to know that if you're gonna collect off that allocation area, what your projected revenue is gonna be, if the development was fully realized. And that's obviously gonna be an incentive for us to be able to explain to the subdivisions, the political subdivisions, to say, Flora, if this is fully realized, this is what your new revenue would be. Or the schools, this is what your new revenue would be. So we would want a financial analysis on all of those so that we're all covered, frankly. So, that's protection for you guys if you're ever having to bond or loan money on a development project. You're gonna wanna know that that project goes upside down, that there is a financial mechanism in place to pay you back for the debt that you put in that property. I mean, we're not gonna take pipes out of the ground, right? But this body needs to be reimbursed for the public dollars that it's spent in an area, and that TIF allocation allows that safety net to be there, on a project.
So,
Are we out of line, Barry, by asking to have a motion to approve Jake's request first and then change the budget afterwards?
I think that's putting the horse after the carriage. I would recommend that you first transfer, get the money, and then you're in line, you can then spend the money.
Okay. Just double check to make sure.
I move to transfer $50,000 from the 421 project to a new line titled Professional Services.
From the 421 project?
Well, whether bucket you wanna pull it out. I'm
I
open.
would think from your savings, am I right? Just the
That's a fund.
Yes.
That's a different fund number. You can't transfer fund to fund. It has to be in the 4501.
Well,
Or I could ask
you got
that, I mean,
50.
I could
You
go.
got 50,000 in there.
it would come out.
It has to be currently appropriated. I mean, I could go grab Beth real quick and we could.
Okay.
Do it.
But it's really
If she's
confusing.
there,
He's right.
why does it matter whether you got a saving, you got a Jake's?
Well, there's plenty of money in there.
Because of the-
It's not.
Because of the damn government.
Yeah, that'll get you pretty far these days.
Go deal. What we did.
Well, so, what's to prevent? So you go to town A and you identify 30 acres over here that would be a fantastic place. But after you identify that, a year or whatever, on the other side of the town, there's another 30 acres that has passed away and donated it to whoever,
And it's unlikely.
and they're putting it up for sale to convert to cash, and somebody wants to now build over there because they like that side of the town better. There's any way we can just put the whole county in?
So-
I say that jokingly, but you know, how do you pick and choose? Because
Yeah.
where it might end up happening is totally different
There's
than
some
what you've
townships that are
identified.
excluded because of the means test.
I mean,
The-
as
the
we
what?
started into this, I mean, that's how we
Yeah.
have to do every
Yeah, so
dollar.
there are some areas that are excluded, so just because they've had residential growth, that more than that 1%.
Yes.
But to answer your question, I think, I'm willing to look at any shape and model for this residential tip, as big or small as the appetite is for the political subdivisions around it. So if they really want residential growth and we can surround them with the resources they need, then yes, I absolutely agree with you, that we need to look at this holistically to say, how big? There's really no risk in that, because we're not taking anything, and you guys control whether you're releasing that TIF allocation back to that political unit anyway. So it's not like you're blocking them from growth. But if they want tools, if the communities want tools to grow residential development and around them, then they would be accepting of, you know, a larger area, or the schools as well. So I think there will be, as part of the EDC's job, is to help kind of negotiate what that size is and what it looks like. I'd like to think, like I said, we would like to bring that professional services to the community that we provide and contracted, that we do economic development services for. Here's an area of high growth, we've talked to the landowners, just in those scenarios, we won't get them all, but I think that as long as we're realistic in what these boundaries look like, we're not drawing lines in the sand, we're not taking money, so realistically, it's just a shadow on a map, and then it helps us identify and work with landowners, or if it is in the TIF allocation area and the farm does sell, now they realize that that tool has been overlaid on their property, they might or might not be aware of it, and then that makes it, maybe changes the conversation for the next generation, which in turn, we won't probably be here for, but at least we've set that tool up in place for them to be able to have that decision. Great, that's a great question.
And how long will a TIF exist without anything happening? 25?
Yeah, in 10 years, we may not be in the market that we're in, but then in 15 more, we might be. So it just, we want this to be a tool that regardless of the markets, it's not, it's kind of the rudder deep perspective.
So knowing what that budget ought to be to dive into this is just, we don't know, because we don't know how big it is. I mean, if it's one parcel, it's one price, but if it's 20 parcels, it's something different. So throwing a number out there kind of gives us a starting point, but it might not be the end of the cost associated with creating these
Well, I don't think the
multiple.
size of the circle really
Changes.
has a correlation to the cost of the project. I mean, it might, just a tiny bit from Baker Tilly's perspective, but Rick Hall's cost is the same pretty much, whether it's,
I'm just like Barry,
whether it's one parcel or 100 parcels.
it's just how much, how many
I think you throw out,
parcels,
you throw out,
survey requirements.
you throw out a dollar figure, and then, we spend it all,
When we expanded this TIF, we didn't survey one property.
Yeah.
I mean, we just took them as they were parcelized with these key numbers. And that would be the ideal thing, is if you take it in its entirety as it's represented currently for tax purposes, then there's no surveying to be required.
I'm sorry, I have one question. We keep talking about the other divisions and such that have to approve all of this, and I was kind of, maybe it's because I got there late and I didn't see the faces of people, I was looking back ahead, but there are some key players I did not see at the meeting last week in regards to getting approval from these other entities. I assume you've already had conversations with them, and are they okay with everything, and they're eager to move forward?
There's a general consensus that we can move forward through the school districts as well as elected, the town officials as well. So there are some, I think we need more, there's other areas where I feel that we need to have more conversations. But yes, most folks that are elected officials are aware that we're having this discussion now, or I've spoke directly to them. So yeah, I hate to say that we've talked to everyone, because there'll always be someone that maybe just didn't connect with. So, yeah, there is a general consensus, I think, to move forward with it.
Okay, Josh,
I think Beth, yeah, she was with a customer, but, you know, to vary at a sidebar here, but I think the most appropriate action is we have the biggest bucket of money in the 421 project. We can't transfer from 4501 to, I forget the fund numbers, like. so-
4509
Oh, yeah.
savings into 4501.
Right, like those, the money first has to be appropriated, the appropriation is just a line item in the budget. So I would move that we transfer 50,000 out of the 421 project, because that is gonna go over 2 calendar years anyway, so, I mean, the odds of us spending that entire line this year are pretty minimal, from my perspective. So we transfer 50,000, so let me restart. I move that we transfer $50,000 out of, the 421 project into a new line to be, referred to as professional services in 4501.
Second.
Ms. Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I move to, give the EDC the authority to work on our behalf to establish a residential TIF, with a budget of not to exceed $30,000.
Not to
No,
exceed,
not to exceed 30,000.
not to exceed 30,000. Do you have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 30,000 EDCs. Anything else? Brian, I'm sorry, you're here, if you had anything.
Cookies.
I'm leaving
Thank you for the
$50,000
cookie.
cheaper.
Just remember, you're short 50.
Sharpen that budget.
Okay, next meeting will be.
If he doesn't have that road done, it'll be 50,000 less next month.
Maybe a little bit narrower.
June 14th, 1 o'clock. Excuse me?
No.
Okay, move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
June 14th, 1 o'clock.
Sorry, just.